Welcome to Lyme Time. I'm Allie from the Tick Chicks. We are all more than Lyme disease and chronic illness, and together we stand with you to overcome and rise. I'll bring you closer to the experts in cutting-edge treatments and even a few unexpected ways of healing. I'll ask the questions you want answers to regarding Lyme disease and successful ways of getting you closer to 100%. We are in this together and will not be defined by Lyme.
Welcome to Lyme Time. Thrilled to have you back. If you've ever questioned herbal protocols, how effective they are, and how exactly they treat Lyme disease and co-infections, this is the episode for you. My guest is Dr. Myriah Hinchey, and she is a Connecticut licensed naturopathic physician and fellow of the Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs, which is MAPS for short. With more than 17 years of experience, she is a leading authority on Lyme disease and other complex chronic infection-driven inflammatory conditions. She serves as the medical director of TAO, Center for Vitality, where she has helped thousands of patients, both children and adults, recover from chronic illness. She is also the founder of Lyme Core Botanicals, a physician-formulated herbal medicine company focused on safe, potent, and effective solutions for vector-borne diseases. In addition, Dr. Hinchey is the host of the Lyme Bites podcast and creator of the annual Lyme Bites Symposium, platforms that bring together patients, practitioners, and thought leaders to share science, solutions, and hope. She's also a sought-after lecturer training medical professionals on how to successfully integrate functional, herbal, and lifestyle medicine into their practices for more successful, lasting resolution of chronic infection-driven illnesses. Her mission is simple: to bring awareness and truth to infection-driven chronic illnesses, helping people recognize these stealth infections for what they are and guiding them carefully toward lasting recovery by individually restoring the body's terrain, calming inflammation, rebuilding immune balance, and naturally eradicating the infection, creating the foundation for true, lasting healing. Welcome to Lyme Time, Dr. Hinchey.
Thank you, Allie. Thank you so much for having me here.
This was a long time in the making. I know that you and I have had different life things come up, and we've meant to record for over a year now. So I'm very, very excited to have you here today.
I am too. I'm glad the moment is finally here and I get to meet you somewhat in person.
That's right. That's right. We finally get to meet. Well, I want to jump right in. And, I often ask for everybody's story because I think it's so interesting what leads people down the path toward wellness and then personal wellness and then helping each other achieve personal wellness and sort of what happened to curate your life in such a way.
So it's a really long, convoluted story. So I'll try to give you the shortest version. I've always been interested in alternative types of medicine. And so going to school as a naturopathic doctor, we are always trained to find the root or the underlying cause. And so and that plays a role later on in the story. But also when I was in school in clinic, I was fortunate enough to have a patient who was a woman in her early 20s that had chronic babesia and chronic Lyme, and I had never heard those terms before. And she had failed 6 months of IV Rocephin. She walked with a cane. She was in a very, very bad way. And I had her for the last year that I was in school. So she was under my care for about 9 months. And we tried a lot of Chinese herbal medicines. We were doing peat baths, hyperthermia, not to the extent of, where you're put under anesthesia and going into hypothermia. But I mean, doing like saunas and steams, things like that to get the core temperature up. And she said that she felt better, in the 9 months working with me. than she had from any other treatment, but she was still ill. And so luckily, I was forced to be Lyme literate. And what I mean by that is just knowing that Lyme is not what we are taught in any medical school, including naturopathic medical school. And so I had seen someone that had failed not only the typical treatment for Lyme and Babesia, but also pretty, extended and aggressive a treatment as well. So then fast forward, I'm out in practice. I'm just starting my practice. And again, I'm trained to look for the underlying cause. And at this point, I had already become a member of ILADS and had learned how to properly test, in the specialty testing companies and how to interpret those tests and whatnot. And so I spent, the first probably like 5 years of my career diagnosing vector-borne diseases in patients that would come to me with a slew of symptoms because it's the great imitator. So everything from like women thinking that they were having menopausal symptoms to, people being diagnosed with atypical MS or atypical ankylosing spondylitis or, keyword atypical, meaning you don't fit the typical diagnostic criteria to get that diagnosis. And so then I was getting them off to like ILADS practitioners, that were using triple antibiotic therapy and whatever other the appropriate, pharmaceutical therapies were to treat the infections. And I was just kind of trying to like protect their gut and do all of the things, right, as a naturopathic doctor. So then fast forward, I start having all these crazy symptoms. And I would be in mid conversation with a patient and go, what was I just saying? They'd be like, ha ha ha. And I'm like, no, like, what was I just saying? And it wasn't like, within 5 or 30 seconds, you'd get it back. It's like, it was gone. And then I remember being at a party with my husband's back then he was my boyfriend, but like with all of the friends. And we were playing this game where all you had to do was write down the first and last name of any celebrity. And I couldn't think of one first and last name to write down. And I remember going in the bathroom and crying, and he came and found me and he's like, what's the matter with you? I'm like, something's really wrong with me. Like scary. Something's really scarily wrong with me. And I was having like drenching night sweats and just all of these things, random pain, headaches, etc. So of course I go to my primary care physician and she's like, oh, Myriah, you're just too stressed out and you're climbing too many mountains and doing too much yoga. And despite the fact that your periods are every 28 days like clockwork, you must be going into early menopause. So luckily, I knew what I knew at the point, and I called some of these, Lyme literate ILADS docs that I was currently referring patients to, one in particular, and I was like, you have to help me. And I tested positive for Babesia, Bartonella, Borrelia, Mycoplasma, and Chlamydia pneumoniae. Yep.
Oh my goodness.
And so, yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember getting bit by a tick somewhere around 10 years old, and it was a big deal. And I remember having to go and get my blood drawn for the first time and having to they put me on amoxicillin. And then I remember like the phone rang, the doctor was like, great news, she doesn't have Lyme disease, stop the antibiotics. It's like, okay, so you tested me 3 days after the bite. Of course I was negative. And then the thing that really just almost gives me chills is that I went on to develop anxiety. I got stretch marks all over my body, and I was like a string bean. I was sleeping in a sleeping bag outside of my mom's bedroom door because I was afraid someone was going to break into our house and steal us. I started wetting the bed again. Like all these things that I now know, it's like I had PANS. I had Lyme. And it turned into PANS. And it was explained away by hormones and puberty and a phase and all of these things. But like I went on to live a pretty normal life, like I wasn't debilitated. I got through high school and all of that just fine. And it wasn't until I was 35 years old going through an extremely stressful situation and kind of like the shit hit the fan and all of this came on. And so, I do give you that detailed of a story because it just goes to show how when someone's healthy, they can live their whole life with these infections and not really know. But then when the immune system takes a hit because of stress or because of something extreme in their life, like all of a sudden these infections can get a foothold and explode.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. And I think everybody can relate in one way or another to your story, especially if they just suddenly had the onset of symptoms, but then didn't remember necessarily a tick in that moment. But
Right.
sure, I mean, I'm the same way. I had tick bites when I was younger, and I always felt a little, maybe a tiny bit weaker than maybe not as much endurance as the next person, but you just kind of chalk it up to whatever. But I'm glad for our listeners, and I'm also glad for you that you have the personal experience of treating Lyme so that you can actually relate to what everybody's saying, no matter what symptom it is, I'm sure to a big extent.
Yeah, there's been few times when somebody has described a symptom to me when I've not been able to relate to remembering having that symptom in particular. And I'll tell you what, I laugh and I say everything happens for a reason because there are times, especially when, children or teens or even adults are trying to explain a symptom to me and they're like, "Oh my God, I'm not even going to try to explain it because I sound crazy." And I'm like, "Try me." And I can literally finish their sentence and they're like, "Oh my God, like no one's ever been able to describe that feeling before." So, I mean, it comes in handy for sure.
Yeah, I really, if your doctor has never, or your health practitioner has never experienced Lyme themselves, or even a chronic sort of invisible illness, it's very hard to bridge the gap.
It
Um,
really is.
I had that misfortune early on in my journey, and I was just, kept being sent to specialist because my doctor was just dumbfounded. Like it never even, these kinds of things never even crossed her mind. So it was, unfortunately, I lost years of getting help because of that. So glad that you're one of our community members as well as an amazing health practitioner. So tell us a little bit about um, your Lyme patients, what you're seeing, how you're treating some of the more successful treatments for Lyme disease at the Tau Center.
Sure. So let's see. I mean, my patients really range from those who have no idea that they have Lyme or another vector-borne disease, to those who have been on pharmaceutical antibiotic treatment, whether it's single antibiotics or triple antibiotic therapy, or tafenoquine or dapsone, or rifampin for BART, like whatever it happens to be. And for whatever reason hasn't gotten better. And I mean, I know that there's thousands and thousands of patients who have gotten better that way. And clearly, I'm not going to see them, right? So the ones that come to me a lot, especially now that I'm on these various platforms, often know what they have and have failed other treatments. And so I see patients of all age. My subspecialty is pediatrics, specifically pediatric special needs. I'm a fellow of the organization, the Medical Academy of Pediatrics and Special Needs. And, I would say the way that my treatment differs and the reason why I think I'm able to help these people that haven't been able to be helped with the other treatments is that my focus isn't on killing the organism. So I kind of say, as long as they've had the right antibiotics at the right doses for the right periods of time and they've been combined in the right way, to me, it's like, are more antibiotics really going to help? Like, if they didn't help before, why on earth would they help now? And to continue on a little bit with my story, so I got to the point where I had been on combination antibiotic therapy plus atovaquone for 18 months. And I was completely symptom free. But every time I tried to stop the antibiotics, I would relapse within like a month, no joke. And nobody could really understand it, any of the doctors that I was working with. So I found Stephen Buhner, master herbalist, who passed a couple years ago, but he dedicated pretty much his whole life to researching herbal treatments for these vector-borne diseases. And I went to a seminar that happened to be literally an hour from my house, 2 months from when I found him, which I just think is kismet because he lived in New Mexico. And it was one of the last little conferences that he ever put on. And anyway, so we started kind of corresponding and I mentored with him a little bit and I started doing all of his herbs. And then because they were helping me, I started doing all of his herbs with my patients. And so I ended up spending another 5, 6, 7 years doing integrative treatment where we were doing antibiotics and herbs because spoiler alert, like that's what finally got me better. But then he put my name in a book and started referring some patients to me. So I had patients coming to me and I was literally telling them like, look, no, you've got to do the integrative therapy. That's what works because it worked for me and it was working for other patients. And, I would have people say, no, like, I'm with you because I want to do the herbs only. Or I would have patients allergic to certain classes of antibiotics, or we would have a patient that was in this self-selected integrative group, we'll call it, but their liver enzymes would go up. So they'd have to stop their antibiotics, or they got C. diff, or they just got gastritis, or they were like, it's year 3, I'm done with antibiotics. And then they would be moving over to like this herb only group. And over time, we started to notice that patients in the herb only group, now granted, we're doing all this other lifestyle stuff too, and I'll get into that, but these people were becoming symptom free more quickly and able to wean off of their herbal protocols without relapsing, usually around year 2 or 3. While I had all of these other people rounding year 2, year 3, year 5, and nowhere near symptom free or able to come off. And then I remember being at a conference where the focus was on the microbiome. And I remember sitting there in a lecture, and it was like, certain species of healthy bacteria suppress inflammation. And, if you have dysbiosis and if your gut isn't working properly, your immune system can't function properly. And I was like, oh my God, that's it. Like, that's the missing link. Like, you can't heal someone's gut and restore proper microbiome diversity and function when you're actively killing it with pharmaceutical antibiotics. And it had become apparent to me over the years that the number one goal to be able to get rid of the chronic infection is to restore the immune balance that these infections break. So now,
a big light bulb moment.
Yes.
And, and I'm just curious because I didn't find herbs until later in my journey. I really wish I had, but I think I came from such a Western medicine culture that in my mind, I thought, okay, I'll get to that later. First, I want the pill. I want the magic pill that's going to kill Lyme disease because obviously, if you come down with a disease, we must have a solution for that.
Right.
And that's where I got stuck and tripped up for quite a while. And so then, as you know now, I really sing the praises of herbal protocols, whatever kind you can get your hands on. And then I had a child that went through Lyme disease as well. And of course, immediately, we tried the antibiotics that just as sort of let's do a round of that before we go into herbs. And the herbs sure did work. They really did. Now, do they work on, let's say somebody came in with what you had in your blood bloodstream at the time you got diagnosed with Lyme disease. Do they work on all of that? Or do you target certain co-infections with them? Are they able to clear the actual Lyme disease?
Yeah, so there's a multitude of studies actually on a handful of these herbs. And so, when I kind of, maybe it's helpful to walk through like when I'm choosing an herbal protocol. So this goes beyond like the whole lifestyle, diet, detox, etc. But like just putting together an herbal protocol for somebody, this is how I train other practitioners to think through it. And even for listeners who are patients, AI is wonderful. You can find the answers and the studies to all of this. So I like to walk people through my thought process. So if we understand the organism and how it basically changes our body to be able to live inside of it or make our bodies hospitable to its presence, if we look at it, it's about 7 steps, so to speak. So number 1, understand the immune dysfunction that it causes, right? So we can look at, does it push Th1 dominance, Th2 dominance, Th17 dominance? And then we can look up herbs that are able to undo what it's doing. Then if we know the fancy chemicals called cytokines, if we know what cytokines it exploits in the body, then we can use herbs that we know are able to modulate those specific cytokines. Then, if we look up what organs of the body it likes to invade, because certain organisms have an affinity for certain organs or tissues in the body, we can look up herbs that protect those specific organs or tissues. Then, if we understand, does it build a vacuole to escape the immune system? Does it hide behind a biofilm? Does it go deep intracellularly when it's typically thought of as an external or extracellular pathogen? Obviously, we have to focus on giving our body what it needs to detox and get the routes of elimination open so that we're detoxing all of the toxins that it spills when we start to kill it. And then killing it really comes down to what type of organism is it? Is it a gram-negative bacteria, gram-positive bacteria? Is it plasmodial or parasitic? Is it viral, etc.? And so if we can go through the thought process of all of those things, then we can put together an herbal protocol that covers all of those bases. So there are studies that show that, for example, cryptolepis is antiplasmodial, antiparasitic, antimalarial, antibabesial, anti-gram-negative bacteria, and anti-gram-positive bacteria. And if I didn't already say it, anti-spirochetal. And so, if we can pick an herb that covers all of those steps, and, you really only have to put together about 6 for Lyme, and there's about 6 for Babesia, and there's about 10 for Bartonella. Bartonella is one of the most kind of like stubborn and hard to get through, and there's a lot of moving parts. But I mean, you can actually treat the 3 Bs by using those 10 herbs. And again, it's like walking through all of these steps and, making sure that when you choose an herb, not just that it's anti-gram negative or anti-spirochetal, but does the study show that it got Borrelia in all of its morphological forms? So for example, if you're going to use antibiotics, you typically have to pick a class of antibiotics to treat the motile form, like a cephalosporin or amoxicillin. You then have to pick a class that's going to get after the intracellular form, so the form that goes deep in the cell. And that's like your tetracyclines or your macrolide antibiotics, like azithromycin. And then you have to get after that cyst form or the round body form. And you can use things like Tindamax or Flagyl to get after that form. But see, the thing with Lyme or Borrelia that lives in those 3 morphological forms is that it can sense what is actually disassembling it, because with pharmaceutical antibiotics, they have one action and it just does one little thing to the organism. But just like a swarm of bees senses what the other bees are doing, right? Or like the blackbirds that fly, Borrelia as a whole senses what's killing it and it just turns into the other form. So if you're only doing one at a time, you're just chasing it. So you have to do all three of those at a time, and usually for several months. Then you have to put in an herb or a proteolytic enzyme or something to break down the biofilm, right? And so, like, there's all of these moving pieces. So, even though pharmaceuticals feel more powerful, right? And feel like you're doing the prudent thing. And listen, you came from a Western medicine. I was a naturopathic doctor who was trying to convince people they had to do triple antibiotic therapy with herbs in order for it to work. So I'm right there with you. Thank God I had my patients and what happened to myself to literally teach me that that wasn't the case.
Now, I want to jump into your own personal line because you helped create it, the Lyme Core Botanicals. So, tell us about that line, and is it also used for things other than Lyme disease?
Yeah, I picked a terrible name because it's so useful for all of these other things, but we're at a conference and people come up and they're like, "Oh, this is just for Lyme." And I'm like, well, yeah, that's what the name says. But I mean, for example, Japanese knotweed is anti-inflammatory, protects endothelial cells, is effective against both gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria. It does so many amazing things. And so, of course, it's not just the Lyme bacteria, right? I mean, it's helpful, for example, with COVID and the spike protein, if it protects endothelial cells, right, where a lot of that damage is being done, and it inhibits a lot of the inflammatory cytokines, which we know the cytokine cascade is a big, big part of long COVID and acute COVID. For example, Japanese knotweed is a wonderful herb to use in long COVID. And I could give you a whole bunch of other examples that I won't, but
Yeah, no, I think it's incredible that you've actually taken what you've learned, your experience, and developed something that's easy to digest for people, but both mentally and figuratively, but really just helping them take something home with them and put it to work immediately. And what is our typical, what do you say would be a typical turnaround from somebody who comes in with acute symptoms to sort of maintaining a dormancy, through the protocol?
Sure. So if you mean acute, like as in a new infection, I typically do recommend if you are finding out very, very close to that tick bite that you do actually go on the proper antibiotic or antiparasitic protocol, because as you well know, this is so much easier to prevent than to treat once it becomes chronic. So if someone has an acute tick bite, we are typically hitting it with the appropriate pharmaceutical as well as an herbal arsenal, to try to just shut it down and prevent that chronicity from developing. I think what you're asking, and if it's not, I can re-answer, but typically if someone has been sick for around a year to 2 years, I would say average treatment time with me is about a year to a year and a half. And I do expect to see about a 25% improvement, meaning reduction in overall symptoms, but also reduction in severity and frequency of symptoms that are left by 90 days of being on what is your like full protocol. And we get on the full protocol in steps. And a patient's full protocol is a personalized, individualized protocol. And it usually takes the first 2 to 3 months, depending on how bad their gut is, to get them to the point where we can add the final piece of their personalized protocol, which is basically the killing. Because if we start killing before the body is ready and open and eliminating, and we have some of that inflammation under control, we're going to herx them like crazy. So if you've been sick for more like the 2 to 3 years, you're probably more on a 2-year path. And if you've been sick for a decade, it's typically 3-ish years. But that's no longer than the pharmaceutical antibiotic route. And that doesn't mean you're going to feel terrible for that amount of time. Most people have regained about 80% of themselves by the end of year 1, enough so that most people want to stop their protocols.
Wow.
But if you stop your protocol before you have restored immune competence and before you have rebuilt the immune system and completely healed the gut and the microbiome, your chances of relapsing are so much higher, because antibiotics only shrink the load to the amount that is manageable by the immune system. And then it's a competent immune system that has to stop that from growing back. So a lot of people will treat, they'll feel better, and then they're like, cool, now I'm going to go detox. Now I'm going to go heal my gut. Now I'm going to do all the things to get my health back. Meanwhile, if the immune system isn't stopping the infection from growing back, it does what any bacteria does in the body, and it multiplies and multiplies and multiplies and multiplies until they're fully relapsed.
And what are your top favorite ways to build that immune system?
So I love using inflammatory modulating herbs. My favorite being, I feel like you're completely modifying if you add together Japanese knotweed, Chinese skullcap, ashwagandha, and then if someone doesn't have any mold issues, cordyceps. And then one of my favorite things is G3M. It's a specialized form of modified citrus pectin that actually inhibits interleukin 6 and interleukin 1 beta. And it does a whole slew of other things. It protects your collagen, it binds heavy metals, it breaks down biofilms, increases natural killer cells, like all of these different things that are super important to be looking at as a holistic treatment for getting these infections out of the body.
Wonderful. And then once they go through that phase of treatment with you, what would be the final step? What does that sort of look like once you've really built back up that immune system?
So once they've gotten to the point that they've been symptom free for 2 months, and that's the main goal, especially if you're a child or a young person, I wholeheartedly believe that you shouldn't have any symptoms. And even as an adult and even as a middle-aged adult, I'm so tired of hearing doctors explain everything away because of someone's age, or the normal aging process. So once we have gotten them symptom-free for 2 solid months, things aren't getting any better or any worse, I will repeat all of the blood work that led me to their clinical diagnosis, right? So we're looking for shifts in the immune system that have now normalized, markers of inflammation that are now normalized. And then if all of that looks good, then I will go back and I will actually repeat their vector-borne disease testing that they had. And I am looking, and I know some doctors don't agree with this, and that's fine. We can all have our own opinions. I look to make sure all IgMs are gone. And I get this most of the time with my patients. So to me, if IgMs are still there, that means that infection is actively still changing its forms, it's still switching its proteins, and it's still active enough that it's actively trying to evade the immune system. So I want IgMs gone. And then IgGs, if we're looking at a test like IGeneX, and anyone who's had it knows what I'm talking about, there's like either a minus, an IND, or 1+, 2+, 3+, etc. So if we're looking at an IgG panel, we would want at best to only see INDs or negatives. To me, that says, okay, this could be memory, right? Because we develop memory after we've seen an organism. But if you still have pluses, 2 pluses, 3 pluses, guess what? That's not showing memory. That is showing chronic infection, right? And then there are other testing companies that give you an actual number. And so again, for me, like using Vibrant America on their test, I would say a 10.1 to like maybe a 12. I could buy that that's a memory cell. But if you're throwing 18s, 19s greater than 20, or sorry, greater than 30s for IgGs, guess what? That infection is still there, And so you're not going to have sky high IgGs a year after resolving the infection. So I do want to see that those tests have come down to the point where I would believe they're memory cells or they've completely cleared them from the body. And we see things clear all the time. So don't let your doctor tell you that your test is going to be positive for the rest of your life, because I could pull hundreds of tests that are no longer showing that antibody production.
I mean, would you say it's fair to say that some people may always show that?
Sure. Yes.
But
absolutely.
But it could be just more of in its dormant state. If you're symptom free for years, you would be okay with that.
Yep. And I will have patients recheck like once they've been symptom-free for 2 months, we relook at all of this. I will then wean them off the herbs that are strongly the killers. Mm-hmm. And then I'll wait 4 weeks. If there's no relapse, then I will pull the rest of the herbs out of the protocol. So the ones that were managing the immune system and the inflammation. We wait 4 weeks. No relapse. We then go to anything else that was supportive. Pull it out, no relapse. Okay, now we're going to repeat your micronutrient test, because your need for certain vitamins, minerals, I end up putting my patients on N-acetylcysteine and glutathione and phosphatidylcholine and phosphatidylserine and, all of these extra things, because the body, something people don't realize, these organisms take all of that from us because they can't make them themselves. So almost every patient is so depleted of their B vitamins, of zinc, of iron. And it's like, yeah, because the infection's taking it so they can live. So like a nutrient need at the end of treatment is night and day different than what it was in the beginning. So we'll repeat so that we can still give them what they need, but not have them on these boatloads and high doses of things that they just don't need anymore. I'll then retest like their food sensitivity tests or any like gut testing that we did, and then really start introducing things back into the diet and whatnot. And then I'll have them repeat their tick-borne disease testing 6 months, 9 months, or a year later. We just want to make sure, like, okay, we got our baseline at the end. Say you had a bunch of INDs, but now they're a plus or 2 pluses, or you have other protein KD bands now popping positive. Well, that would suggest the infection has now come back out and it's active again, or you got rebit, God forbid, which happens a lot.
That does happen a lot. I'm here to say that.
Yeah, same.
Now, it just blows my mind, honestly, that the people, the health practitioners out there, doctors included, MDs, even some integrative medicine doctors are still not even understanding how Lyme disease works once it's in the body, and how it just is such a systemic breakdown. And so I am just so glad that you came to educate us, because some people out there are still educating their own doctors and saying, hey, listen to this podcast or listen to what the research says, read what it's saying. And I encourage everybody out there to take in your own research if need be, or find a new team of doctors, obviously. I want to talk about your Lyme bites, because you have your fingers in so many different areas right now, between speaking and events and all of that. But tell us a little bit about the Lyme Bites Symposium.
Sure. So I love the Lyme Bites Symposium. So I wanted to create kind of like a forum for learning for any medical practitioner who is interested, as well as patients and as well as patient advocates, to be able to come together and learn more from like a functional medicine perspective. So again, not kill, 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 but like how do we heal people with Lyme, number one, and also really talk about all of the other things that Lyme masquerades as and show, the data showing like this percent of Alzheimer's patients were found to have Borrelia or Bartonella. And then, this percent of like kids with PANS or kids on the spectrum and be able to like show the data with the correlation, which I do think is part of the underlying cause of these illnesses, or sometimes the underlying cause, and then show if we can find the studies how resolution of the infection made these people either lose their diagnosis or heal from it or stop the progression of the disease or fill in the blank scenario. But then I also realized about 5 years ago that there were all of these treatment grants that I had no idea. I mean, and I've been doing this year's 20 years. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if I don't know that these treatment grants exist, I wonder how many other doctors don't know that these resources exist for their patients.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to bring together not only the cutting edge functional medicine education, but I wanted to bring together all of the industry experts that have, supportive adjunctive therapies like far infrared sauna or HBOT, or things like that, as well as the companies that provide accurate testing and as well as the clean supplement companies, et cetera. And then I wanted to bring in these nonprofit organizations that either do education or provide treatment grants and get us kind of all under one roof in one area so that we can all work together for the benefit of the patient and helping the patient to find these resources.
That's wonderful. I just love that. And how often does it take place and where is it?
So we just moved last year to Pompano Beach in Florida, which is amazing. We are right on the beach. It had been in Connecticut because that's where I'm from. And it's once a year. It is always the second weekend of November. And for now, I feel like we've kind of found our forever home. So we're going back to the same hotel. It's the Pompano Beach Marriott Hotel. And it's beautiful. It was just completely redone. You should come. Happy to have you. Come join us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And tell us just in closing a little bit about where everyone can find you, how you practice. Do you do virtual appointments, that kind of thing? And also just some final words for our listeners out there who are battling very hard today.
Okay. So my clinic is Tau Vitality, TAOVITALITY.com. That is where you would call if you wanted to do a consult with me. If you are in a country or state outside of where I'm licensed to be a patient, I am licensed in Connecticut and New Hampshire. So you would have to physically be in one of those states during your appointment in order for me to technically be your doctor and for you to be a patient. What was the other? Oh, Lymecore Botanicals is the supplement company. So that's LYMECORE.com. And then Lyme Bites, we have the annual symposium that I just told you about. But we also have a podcast, the Lyme Bites podcast, and we're working on a membership. And so that's LYMEBYTES.com. And I think my biggest piece of advice is to know that you can get better. Know that there are doctors out there that want to help you and can help you. And don't ever listen to anyone in your life, your doctor or medical professional included. Don't ever listen to them tell you that this is in your head or that what you're telling them isn't possible. or that you can't get better, or that you need a psychiatric drug. Like, it's so not true. And if you feel like you have multi-systemic symptoms, meaning like it's not just in one part of your body, if you feel like your whole body is falling apart along with your mind and your emotions, something's going on. And if you have anything that just comes on abruptly, that is infectious. That is not normal neurodegeneration. That is not how any other illness, chronic illness, comes on. So it's like if you can draw a line in the sand and say, I've not been right since that date, or my kid has not been right since then, it's typically an infectious process triggering an immune dysfunction or autoimmunity. And don't stop until you get the answers that resonate with you. Because if they don't resonate with you, they're not the right answer. You know yourself, you know your body, you know your kid better than anybody else on this earth, especially your doctor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
You're
much for
welcome.
those final words. I'm sure you're just inspiring people as they listen to this. We are lucky to have you in our community, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. We'll come find you.
Thank you, Allie. I really appreciate, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Lyme Time Podcast. If you like what you heard, please subscribe on your favorite platform to be notified of new episodes. Remember, this is not intended to be medical advice. Take your findings to your provider to see if something is right for you. No two bodies heal the same, and your doctor knows you and your labs best. You can find out more about the Tick Chicks at thetickchicks.com, and if you subscribe there, you'll be notified of upcoming events like the in-person Losing Lyme retreat that I host. I also have shopping pages dedicated to helping your at-home symptom relief, as well as a private support group. Join the Tick Chicks tribe on Instagram, YouTube, Meta, TikTok, Pinterest, and X. You are not alone.